People who love you regardless, or they should anyways. Your safe people should love you regardless of what mood you are in, and so let people love you. This is me giving myself a pep talk. Okay, hi everybody. Thanks for coming back if you've been here before, or hi, welcome if you're new. My name is Mickey. I'm a therapist, and we talk about therapy things on this channel. Today, we're talking about seasonal affective disorder because it's that time of year again. And unbelievably, we've never talked about it on the channel before. So I want to go over what seasonal affective disorder is, why seasonal affective disorder happens, and then how to deal with it, how to make it hopefully a little bit better. So that's it. Let's get into what seasonal affective disorder is. So seasonal affective disorder, heretofore referenced as SAD because it's a really long disorder name. Seasonal affective disorder is a disorder that is in fact distinct from regular depression. There are going to be symptoms that are similar. We're going to go over those in a second, but I wanted to make this distinction because first of all, it's not the same as like winter blues, like a lot of people call it, feeling generally a little bit sad or a little bit bummed about it being cold or the sun being out less, especially for those of you that live in places where that's happening a lot. That is very different from seasonal affective disorder. It's also distinct in that it's not something that's related to a specific trauma or an incident. It's also not something that can be as effectively addressed with a typical depression style treatment. There are things that seasonal affective disorder like specifically requires in order to treat it. Like I said, we're going to go over those in a minute. So symptoms of seasonal affective disorder, like I mentioned, they're going to be similar to other depressive symptoms. Those are going to be things like feeling down most days, feeling like a disappointment or a burden to your loved ones, feelings of worthlessness or guilt or hopelessness or loneliness, loss of interest in things that were previously joyful to you, especially like your hobbies, your interests, things that bring you joy, things that stir up your insides. If you notice that you have less enjoyment in those things, that is a flag to be aware of. Also of note here is low energy and fatigue. And sometimes for folks, usually these don't go together, but sometimes for folks, a feeling of restlessness and also frustration and irritability. Generally, if you're noticing that your mood is a little bit wonky, things are a little bit strange, and you're noticing that like, I'm not enjoying the stuff that I used to enjoy as much. I'm not feeling as energized or as like, go get 'em. That is going to be a warning sign. Also of note here, I think this is, like pretty obvious to most folks, but it's really important and worth mentioning, is that if you have thoughts of SI, I want to make the distinction here because a lot of people don't, and I think that we should, which is that thoughts of SI are not always overt and obvious plans or intent to seriously harm oneself. These can also be passive thoughts, right? Things like, if I fell asleep and didn't wake up tomorrow, I wouldn't be sad about it. That's considered passive SI, and those are also important things for us to pay attention to. We should very much be keeping an eye out for those things. That said, I want to talk about the symptoms that are distinct for seasonal affective disorder, which are social isolation. Sometimes people call this hibernating, which is like often said in like kind of a jokey way, but it's not really a joke, right? When people isolate themselves and they're not really like as apt to engage with their family, their community, their friends, things like that. That's going to be something we want to pay attention to. Also, overeating or binge eating, specifically if we're doing it for the dopamine, right? If we're feeling like nothing is interesting and nothing is really like, grabbing my attention. And so I'm going to eat because it's at least a source of dopamine. Worth paying attention to. Morally neutral and doesn't make you a bad person, to be clear, but worth paying attention to because you deserve care and kindness and support. And also hypersomnia and or sleeping more than you normally do. Again, it's important to differentiate this from just being like tired because you've had like a rough week or because, you're not really like feeling it right now. Sleeping in excess is often going to take up a lot of sleeping in excess is going to be like a noticeable amount of sleeping more than you usually do. It's important that we talk about it around this time of year because there are lots of fun and happy and joyous things around this time of year that you should get to enjoy and that you should be able to, share with your loved ones and with your community. Okay, before we move on though, I do want to talk to you about this week's sponsor, which is Parade. I am jazzed to work with Parade again. I've been a Parade stan actually for a very long time. So I'm super excited to work with them again because they are a sustainability and community oriented brand that they also just sell really comfy and fun underwear, among other things. Especially as a plus size person and formerly large busted person, it was really hard to find a brand that celebrated your body or my bodies for the way that they are now. And Parade does that really wonderfully. It's really affirming to shop on their site. I also am a big fan of the jumpsuit that I'm currently wearing. It's not a jumpsuit, it's a bodysuit. But look at this thing. I'll show you another shot of this, but it's so comfortable. Parade relaunched their Replay collection, which I have been a fan of for a really long time, and they brought it back. So if you were also a fan of the Replay collection, go check that out because they restocked it all. This bodysuit, though, is the Replay long sleeve bodysuit in size 2XL. When I tell you that this thing is so soft, like, I'm being so serious. I want to live in this bodysuit. It also has a low back, which I'm like, okay, cheeky, sexy, cute. Love that for me. I got a bunch of other stuff. I'll show you some shots of the other fun, cutesy things that I got from the Replay collection, and a couple other things, honestly, that are just really fun. But the best news that I have for you, though, is that Parade is having a Black Friday sale from November 27th to December 3rd, and it's going to be lit, y'all. I'm so excited. They're doing 30% off site-wide with a 90% lightning sale. Hello. But the best of the news is that my code Mickey-BF will give you 50% off site-wide. So that code is actually your best deal. So if you want to get your hands on my comfy, cutesy little bodysuit, or you just want to restock on your favorite underwear in fun, cutesy colors, go click that link. You can use my code Mickey-BF for 50% off. Thank you again to Parade for sponsoring this week's video. Let's go ahead and hop back in. Folks often wonder about the cause of SAD, or seasonal affective disorder. Unfortunately, there's not really a definitive cause in the research. We don't really have like a clear indication of why this happens. We do have a couple of suspicions, though, or probably these are the causes. The first of which, I don't think it's a surprise to anybody that the sun being around less fucks up our shit, right? Namely, our circadian rhythm. If you're not aware, our circadian rhythm is like our sleep schedule, right? Also, shout out to having a healthy sleep hygiene. It's very important for your mental health generally. Do be aware of that. But having your circadian rhythm out of whack is often correlated with depression and changes in your mood. So with the sun going down earlier and not being around as much, that is very much an issue for the way that our bodies function. It's also a way or an issue for the way that we produce serotonin. Having a decrease in the sun can very much be correlated with a decrease in our serotonin levels, which obviously that equals the big SADs. On top of that, the days being darker more often, it's suspected that that causes our body to produce more melatonin, which, if you're not aware, is the thing that makes us sleepy. This is why they sell melatonin gummies, for example, because it is a neurotransmitter that helps you to feel sleepy. And so having too much melatonin in your system can also be correlated with the big SADs. Also important for us to shout out here, though, that genetics and other depressive disorders are very much risk factors for developing SAD. So be aware of that, especially if you know that this might be an issue for you, or if it's been an issue for you in years past. Talk with your supportive people or your therapist, clinician, caregiver in some regard, and have hopefully some kind of a plan, a system set in place before things start to shift, before autumn and fall starts to happen, so that we can catch things as they start to happen, rather than having to play catch up and, trying to scramble to get things in order. Which is an excellent dovetail for us to talk about how do we deal with this. Seasonal affective disorder is going to have a couple of things that you can do to help make it better. That said, I do want to be clear that with a disorder like this, it's caused by your environment, right? This is why I think it's very important, for example, that we be aware of our environment and our greater surroundings when we talk about our mental health. Our brain and our mental health doesn't exist in a vacuum. And so with that, SAD is something that we can't necessarily just coping or self-care your way out of, right? You're going to have to sort of come to grips with the fact that, especially if this affects you cyclically, as it often does for folks who suffer with SAD, it's something that we have to plan for and work to minimize the impact of, rather than hoping to erase it altogether. That's not really a realistic expectation. That said, you don't have to be miserable for the whole time. So I think the obvious here is going to be SAD lights. If you're not aware, there's something that are called seasonal affective disorder lights. The way that they work is essentially mimicking the way that the sun impacts our body. So it emits light at a very particular frequency that mimics the sun. This is why it's helpful to us. There is some indication, if you can't afford a sad light, because they can be kind of expensive, to be fair. If you can't afford one of those, there is some indication that grow lights, like people use for plants, might be effective. But I have a very serious caveat here that the research is very undecided about this. The way that the light is emitted in a very particular frequency is the thing that makes it helpful for us. Just sitting in front of like a ring light or like fluorescent lighting is not the same as sitting in front of a sad light. So grow lights can emit a similar frequency, but it's dodgy. It's not like entirely certain in the research. So it might be a good resource if you have no other option to get a hold of a sad light, but don't necessarily hang your hat on that because it might not work as effectively as a sad light would. That said, therapy also, I think that's like not a surprise to anybody. It's also, I think, not a surprise to anybody that therapy is not an accessible resource for all people. So it's not to say that if you can't go to therapy, you can't get better. And like I mentioned earlier, if you have access to that, really want to encourage you to have conversations with those people about how to address this, how we're going to plan for this, because again, it's something that if it affects you cyclically, fall and winter come around every year. And so we want to hopefully put some foundational pieces in place. Along with that, movement in some form or fashion. This does not mean that you have to be like hitting the gym every day. That's not a realistic expectation for a lot of people. And it's also not something that brings people joy, right? So let's not pressure people to do things that aren't fun for them. But moving your body in some form or fashion is very much going to be correlated with an improvement in your mood. We know this from our research about depression, especially. We can very much sort of hack the way that your body responds to things like movement and exercise to prime and boost your mood. So utilizing that as a resource can be very effective. You don't necessarily have to be, like I said, hitting the gym. Something as simple as like mindful stretching or a silly little walk around the block. Again, if that's accessible to you, those are things that can be very much a thing that is to your benefit during this time of year. Also, social engagement is going to be very important. One of the things that is a warning sign for SAD is our social withdrawal, right? And so it's very important that we be making a conscious effort to engage socially, even when it feels like I really don't want to, right? Because again, we can utilize your body's natural response to things like social engagement to your advantage here. And so while it might not feel like a thing that you're interested in or a thing that you have the gumption to do, I want to encourage you to practice engaging in some capacity, even if that means just being honest with your safe people that like, I'm in a bad mood, right? Or I'm depressed. I'm really not feeling funny, cutesy, haha right now, but I want to engage in some capacity, right? So can you just hang out with me on FaceTime? And maybe we don't talk the whole time, right? Maybe we just sort of body double together, or maybe you come over to my house and we just sit and watch TV together, right? Those things are still very much a form of social engagement, and they can be a positive or like a positive impact on your mood. So practice doing that, practice engaging. While digital community is also very valid and very important, I will die on the hill that social engagement and community online is still a valid form of socialization. I also want to encourage you to go outside. Listen, as a person who hates going outside, I see you and I feel you about the frustration of having to do that, because when you're miserable, it's not the thing that you want to do. And it's still very important. What we know, especially about seasonal affective disorder, is that the sun is your friend. And so being inside during the daylight hours for an excess amount of time and not carving out time to go outside, to socialize, to walk your dog, to just sit in the sun for a little while, those are things that are, it's going to decrease your engagement, your interaction, what is the word that I'm thinking of? Exposure. That's going to limit your exposure to the sun, and that's not going to help you. So practice making some kind of effort to go outside. I do encourage folks in situations like these, especially if you're having trouble finding the motivation, sometimes creating a game out of it can be helpful, especially if you're neurodivergent. Gamifying things can sometimes be a great way to improve your commitment to that particular coping strategy. So if that means a sticker chart, right? If that means trying to go outside more than your friend in a given time frame or whatever. I have seen people do things like I'm going to visit every coffee shop in my city by the time the year is over, right? Or I'm going to go to my favorite store and buy like new decor items, right? Or I'm just going to go look at other people's Christmas decor, holiday decor, go on a little walk. Those kinds of things can be a helpful way to kind of like get you moving when you're not really feeling like you want to. Other things that folks have talked about in improving their SAD, such a funny thing to say, improving their SAD is a dawn simulator alarm clock, very popular with neurodivergent folks, can also be a little bit expensive, but if you're able to access that, potentially worth it. Along with that, please talk to people. Please, God, I am begging you, talk to your people about it. It's very important. You're not a bummer. You're not a bummer. You're not a burden. People love you. Your people who love you want to be there for you. And being there for you when you're struggling means being there for you and hearing you talk about when you're not in a good mood, when you're feeling kind of sad, when you're having a shitty time or you don't have anything funny or interesting to say. People who love you regardless, or they should anyways. Your safe people should love you regardless of what mood you are in, and so let people love you. This is me giving myself a pep talk. I also want to encourage you to focus on things that are enjoyable. Mickey, what is wrong with you? Things that are enjoyable for you, especially if you're neurodivergent. Finding something to hyperfixate on can be a great way to help move your way through this season, one hyperfixation at a time. So things like crafts, hobbies, movie marathons with limits. Again, practice going outside. Don't hibernate in your house all day. But, writing, reading, cooking, decorating for the holidays like we talked about. The gamification of any of these things can also be a great way to improve your adherence to those coping strategies for what it's worth. So there are lots of different ways that you can engage with coping strategies that might be more effective from one person to the other. But generally speaking, I really want to encourage you to be kind to yourself, right? Shit's hard out here, especially this season. There's lots of compounding things like the holidays, like politics, that can be a bit of a bummer and can make things like seasonal affective disorder worse. So be kind to yourself, recognize that you're going to go through natural ebbs and flows in this season and that that's okay. And again, talk to your people about it. It's very important. Finding community in times like this can really be a protective factor for your mental health and well-being. And also just that you deserve to be in company and community. That's something that we all deserve. And it's very important that we be, seen, and we feel seen by our people. I also want to give a shout out to our Discord server again, because our server has a bunch of wonderful people who are honest about where they're at and what they're going through. And it's a wonderful place to find community. So if you want to, you can click the link in the description for our Discord server. Well, to the memberships to access the Discord server anyways. It's a wonderful place that people are very uplifting and community oriented. So shout out to them. Love you if you're watching this. But again, generally speaking, be kind to yourself. Give yourself some time and some space. We will move through this season together. Big love to you if you're going through this. That said, if you like the video, you can like the video. You can also subscribe because we do stuff like this and a cute pop culture moment that I'd love to have you stay for. And you can also share the video to help the channel grow and to help each other grow. And I will see you guys next Saturday. Okay, bye.